you have a choice to let it continue to not work, let it continue to be a drain on your own management and leadership skills, a drain on your employees, or you can choose to do something about it.
Hi, I'm Karen Hurt of Let's Grow Leaders.
And I'm David Dye, the president of Trailblaze Incorporated.
And we are here today with Shawn Murphy, the author of The Optimistic Workplace. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Shawn over the last couple of years, and the more I read your work, Shawn, the more I believe we are kindred spirits on this journey.
Amen to that.
and so I'm just really honored to be able to spend a little bit of time with you today, and to have my co-author here with me. So this is a nice opportunity to really share a little bit about your message with our tribes. And so first I would just like to ask, your book is all about the optimistic workplace, which sounds very, very important. And so my question is, when you say optimistic workplace, what do you mean by that? What are the characteristics of an optimistic workplace?
Yeah, that's an important question, because people will assume a couple things. That one, it's about culture, and it's more about workplace climate. So just real quick, the difference between culture and climate is culture is how things get done around an organization. It's the assumptions and behaviors and attitudes of people that kind of come together to implement whatever they're there for within the organization. And culture is very difficult to change. It's rooted in history, right? Climate, on the other hand, is about how it feels to work somewhere. And the greatest influence on climate is a person's immediate manager. That's who they have the greatest amount of interaction with from a formal leadership perspective. So that's one piece, is that it's about the way it feels in a work environment, and that feeling, one way, kind of just carving out many ways that a workplace can feel. One of those is optimism. And when a workplace feels optimistic, I have hope that something good's going to come from my work, right? Mm-hmm. I have an understanding of how I'm contributing to a bigger picture, not just doing the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
And the other piece is that in these organizations, and I went into 7 organizations, interviewed about close to 200 people, and what I learned was that there's a mindset of focusing on what's possible and what's right, rather than what's wrong and what's not going to work.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I imagine, with statistics being what they are and the number of managers that we come in contact with 2/3 of the management workforce not being engaged in their work and disengaged and so forth, that a manager is going to pick up this book, say Optimistic Workplace, and say, they're going to be skeptical. Right. So the question would be for us is, how do you have optimism when your employees are skeptical? Maybe your boss is not supportive. You're not optimistic yet yourself. Yet from that place, that we know statistically the vast majority of managers, that's where they live today.
Right.
How do you suggest we get to a place of optimism?
Well, it starts with the choice. And I talk about this in the book in the beginning and at the end, that if you're aware enough that things aren't working, you have a choice to let it continue to not work, let it continue to be a drain on your own management and leadership skills, a drain on your employees, or you can choose to do something about it. You've got to have a little bit of hope that something is salvageable, because let's think about it. If an optimistic person, we'll say it differently, if we were all pessimistic, what would we be living for, right? At the moment that we encounter something that's horrible, we're like, oh, it's all doomed. It's over.
Sure.
Which there are people who are that way. But if you have a glimmer of hope that, maybe I can do something. I'm not going to get support from HR. I'm not going to wait for my senior management team to proclaim that we're going to now focus on engagement or workplace optimism, but it's believing you can make a difference where you are, and then saying, okay, now how do I do that? And then the book walks people through what that looks like.
So it's taking personal responsibility, and we call it cultural oasis or envelopes of excellence. And wherever you are, that you can create that bubble there for your people.
Yeah. I talk about what I call a pocket of excellence. And a pocket of excellence is, despite what's going on around you in a larger context within the organization, you could create this space where not only you are feeling good about what you're doing, but your team is excelling. And you want it to be contagious, right? You want people to go, and we were talking just a little bit earlier, what are you doing over there? Right. Well, I'm glad you asked. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
You want it to spread, because then it just helps elevate the performance of the entire organization, and not just a team who has a mindful manager who says, I want something more for myself and I want something more for my employees.
Good. It's one of the things that we really love about your book is that it's extremely practical. It's not just theory about, yes, the workplace should be optimistic, because I think we can all conceptually agree that would be better than pessimistic.
Right.
But you show how to do it. So can you give our listeners a couple of practical tips that you would offer in your book that they could do to really impact the results and the culture of their organizations?
Absolutely. So here's the funny thing about writing a book is you never stop thinking about it, right? And then you're out there talking to people and you're hearing other people's perspectives on your work, which is really kind of a trip. It's like, wow, that's what you think about that. That's really interesting. It's not wrong or right. It's just, it's just a different perspective. Mm-hmm. So I learned some new things after the book came out that aren't in the book. In the book, you're going to find what I call the optimism planner, and it walks you through 90 days of what do you need to do from doing the self-work to actually starting to integrate the work into the organization, into your team, and then how do you sustain the work. So, but I've since learned and went back to the data from all of those interviews and found what I call 6 optimism building practices. I won't go into all 6 of them here. But a couple of them, one is, and it's probably the most important, is create clarity. So create clarity is all about goal setting, and goals isn't about what's your individual goal, David? How do you contribute to the team? While that is an important conversation, it's also what's the team goal? What is it that we as a team need to be able to do? Because I make a point that the team is more important than any one individual. And when we start letting the rugged individual take over the whole team, then we start to cloud what's important about the team. So goals, priorities, you've got to know what your priorities are. I'm sure we could probably commiserate over a cup of coffee, how many people are running around in their organizations with their hair on fire because everything is a top priority. Right?
Might need a whole pot of coffee.
A couple of them, right? And it's also about expectations and making sure expectations are understood. In optimistic environments, high performance is characteristic. You can't have high performance if you don't know what your expectations are, if you don't know what the goals are, and if you don't know what the priorities are. Then the last piece is there needs to be a strong feedback loop, right? So you've got to be able to make sure as a leader, you're delivering both constructive and positive feedback. So that's one. The other piece that I would share that is really important is we'll go with lean on leadership is the next one. And much like what the two of you advocate in your book, Winning Well, is you have to have a self-awareness of how you impact others, how you impact people's ability to achieve goals, and how people experience your leadership. You can't create optimism and not know the impact that you have on people and results.
Yeah, very true. Very true. You just mentioned Winning Well, and at the beginning of the interview, Karen mentioned how we just feel such kindred spirits with you. What does Winning Well mean to you in the context of the optimistic workplace?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So the first things that come to mind are, so in Winning Well, you talk about performance and relationships, right? Did I get that right?
Results and relationships. Yeah.
Results and relationships. I knew it was 2 R's. That alliteration. Results and relationships. And in the workplace, in the optimistic workplace, one of the things that I talk about is we've got to redefine this relationship that we have between leader and employee, where the traditional mindset is, I am the boss, you are below me, I know better, I have more experience. While you might have more experience, today it's just such a different dynamic. There's so much information available to an employee internally, right, from all the data that is provided to just what's out there on the internet. So really there's a little bit more of a level playing field. And the other piece is they're not just an employee. That's a whole human being there who has a life outside of this organization. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to create workplace optimism, you want to be able to understand what that person's life is like outside. Not to be best friends, but to be friendly, absolutely, is important. So I think there's definitely some synergies there.
One of our favorite questions to get at that is, once you've got a working professional relationship, is to ask an employee, what's more important to you than this job? And because it honors and acknowledges that they do have that life, and there is something. I can see how that'd be an important part of creating an optimistic workplace.
Yeah.
Shawn, I would love to hear a little bit more about your journey as a leader and how you ended up writing this particular book. Of all the things you could talk about, why the optimistic workplace, and how did you get to that?
So I started very young in this space of coaching, organizational development, organizational behavior. We didn't have those terms at the time. We just called it training, right? Mm-hmm. So I was in training. And I did mergers and acquisitions. So I was part of the team that would come in and prepare people for what we called the flip of the switch. So literally going from how things used to be on Monday to Tuesday, it's a completely different way of doing things. So that really propelled me down this exploration of how do you, because we did mergers and acquisitions horribly. It was chaotic. It was culture crush, meaning crushing your culture, and in place of it is the new one, and ours is better. And it's just very dehumanizing and demotivating to people. And I just thought, there's got to be another way. So that kind of started it. But what really catalyzed the thinking and the exploration of these optimistic work environments was the corporate job that I was in before I left. And I write about this in the book. I was working in HR in a Fortune, I think at the time they were a Fortune 100 company, and one of the best places to work. And I was responsible in part for the tuition reimbursement program, and nobody was using it. So I decided, okay, well, let's overhaul this. And so I was giving the recommendations to the VP of HR, and one of them was, if Karen wanted to take classical guitar lessons, let her take classical guitar lessons, because if it makes her life a little bit better, we're going to benefit from that. And the response I got back was, Shawn, we are not here to help people self-actualize. I will not pay for anything that's not related to the employee's job. And I went, oh, I can't work for this person. And I left shortly thereafter to go out on my own. Yeah. So that's the genesis of the optimistic workplace.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Good. Very good.
Well, Shawn, when in your experience, we talked a little bit about the leaders who might be skeptical and they've got caustic workplace and so forth. One reality of every manager we've ever talked to is they're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
There is so much more to do in the day than they can possibly get through. How do you help them start to create an optimistic workplace? When you're feeling overwhelmed, how do you create the space to do those things?
It's a great question, because I think a lot of us are in that space on a regular basis. And even those who are creating workplace optimism or winning well, right? It's a nature of the beast right now. And so we are in the process right now of getting ready to launch the workshop that comes with the book. And the reason I'm going down this path is that we broke the workshop into 3 parts. And I think the first track answers your question. That first track is you got to do some self-work. And what I talk about is you got to know your leadership philosophy. What are your values? What is your purpose? And what are your strengths? And that's a place to go to when you're feeling like things are potentially, swirling out of control. Is check in with yourself. How am I doing with, aligning with my values? Am I showing up in a way that actually is in alignment with what I say is important? Am I helping the team understand the bigger picture here? So it's really to kind of do a self-check, and run through those areas. Because if you don't push pause, the cliche, you got to slow down to speed up. I think that's what this is. This is an example of what that means.
Okay. So taking care of yourself, starting with you.
Yeah.
Start with yourself. But, the thing is you don't stay there very long, right? Because you got to get back out there and you've got to help the rest of the team who might be, feeling a bit fragile under the weight of everything that is on top of them, in terms of a workload. The other thing, and we spend a lot of times with leaders helping them, and this is astonishing to me that most leaders can't do this, and it's prioritizing the work. As simple as just knowing, okay, what is most important? And there can only be one number one. There's no 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1E, 1. What is that one? And helping them get clear on what that is and get clear on what their priorities are so that they can then go out there and then work with their team to say, okay, let's talk about where you're at. What are you working on?
Right. Good. So I'm curious, before we close, what is the one biggest leadership lesson you learned, or something that you wish you had learned earlier in your career? I think we all have those.
Yeah. Oh, great. Lots of them. The one that is really prevalent for me right now is learning to let go and allow other people to participate in, taking an idea or implementing something, and being okay that it's different than how I would do it. Right. So that is something that I've gotten comfortable with. But in the beginning, I was such a perfectionist, and I still am, but I'm just more aware of it. I was such a perfectionist. It led to judgmental behavior. It's like, well, no, that's not how you do it. So therefore you're wrong and I'm right. Yeah. And I had good relationships, but I think there was a bit of a kind of a wall. And I've learned over time that, this is a we thing, man. This is us doing this. Let people get their fingerprints on the work is far more important than me driving it and, seeing it implemented in a way that I think it should have been implemented.
Yeah. Is there anything we haven't asked you that you really want to make sure that our listeners know about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, there is one thing, and there is such a thing, and David, you were kind of alluding to this at the beginning. There is such a thing of too much optimism. In our conversation that we were having, you were calling it the happy hour, right? And the happy hour, I call the country club effect, where, hey, we all get along. It feels good around here, but guess what? Not much is getting done. And when optimism goes unchecked, what ends up happening is leaders stop holding people accountable, stop giving that feedback, and just letting people just, feel good about being at work. Well, we want both. We want people to feel good, and we want people to be able to generate the results that they're being asked to generate.
Totally. Shawn, one of the things that, just putting a summary, tying a bow around something, a theme that's woven throughout everything you've said, is the role that self-awareness plays for an effective leader, effective manager, creating an optimistic workplace. And you said it different ways, but one that really struck me was when you were talking about yourself and how you're a perfectionist. You're still a perfectionist. What's the difference? Now you're aware of it.
Yeah.
And the reason I think that creates optimism and hope is we don't have to change who we are. We need to be aware of who we are and what strengths we bring and what we need to augment and how we need to show up and play a little bit differently. But we don't have to change who we are.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a very optimistic thought. It gives me hope as a leader, as a manager. So I just wanted to call attention to that. I think it's something that you've woven throughout all of your comments.
That's an interesting point. And, I suspect it's in part why, for me right now, what is a big focus is mindfulness, right? Mindfulness isn't necessarily a spiritual thing, but it's really just being aware of yourself in situations, in relationships, in the way you do work. And I think we as human beings live in a time where it's just, there's so much input. We did an interview with a gentleman. Let me just go off on a tangent here for a second. His name is Bob Neese, and he is in neuroscience. And our brains take in 10 million bits a second. We're only consciously aware of 50 bits. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And the huge discrepancy. And I think, as I explore this, how do I do my best in a very high pressure kind of world right now? Having that self-awareness becomes, I think, a competitive advantage, dare I say.
Yeah.
I think you just did.
I did, yes.
Good. So again, this is Shawn Murphy, and his book is The Optimistic Workplace. And Shawn, where can people find your book?
So a couple places. You could go to Amazon. You could go to Barnes & Noble. You could check out the book's website called optimisticworkplace.com. And there you'll be able to download a free chapter and also download the Optimism Planner, which is basically the plan to help you kind of plan out how to do this.
Oh, fantastic. We encourage everyone, get the Optimistic Workplace. Go get it today. You're going to want a copy of that, and you're going to get started on that plan. Who doesn't want to live with optimism?
I don't know. Yeah.
Shawn, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, David.